What happens when the man who promised to protect you becomes the architect of your deepest pain? Isla Carrington was living a fairy tale, a beautiful home, a billionaire husband, and a baby on the way. She thought she had it all, but in the gilded world of the ultra-rich, secrets fester in the shadows. One rainy afternoon, her fairy tale shattered on the asphalt of a private country road. Her husband, Adrian, let his mistress run her down, leaving her for dead and destroying the life she was carrying. But they underestimated her. They thought they had broken her. But what she did next wasn't just revenge. It was a reckoning that would shock everyone. Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy the story, everyone. The silence in the Carrington estate was a living thing. It seeped from the Italian marble floors, clung to the vaulted ceilings, and pooled in the corners of rooms too vast for two people. For Isla Carrington, 7 months pregnant, and feeling as swollen and delicate as a hothouse orchid, the silence was a constant companion. It was the sound of being owned. Her husband, Adrian, dealt in noise. The roar of his helicopter landing on the back lawn, the staccato rhythm of his fingers on a keyboard, closing a deal worth more than a small country's GDP, the booming laughter he reserved for business partners and sycophants. But with her, he was quiet. His presence was an occupation, a weight in the air that demanded stillness. This morning, he stood before the floor-to-ceiling window in their bedroom, a silhouette of bespoke tailoring against the manicured green of their Greenwich, Connecticut estate. He was talking on the phone, his voice a low, dangerous murmur that didn't carry. It was a frequency meant only for the person on the other end, a sonic wall between his world and hers. Isla shifted in their enormous bed, the silk sheets rustling around her. The baby, a boy they had decided to name Noah, kicked against her ribs, a secret, joyful conversation between them. She placed a hand on the swell of her stomach, a protective gesture that had become second nature. "I'll handle it," Adrian said, his voice hardening for a fraction of a second before smoothing out again. "No, leave it with me. It requires a delicate touch." He ended the call and turned, his face a mask of practiced calm. Adrian Blackwell was a handsome man, sculpted by genetics and the finest personal trainers money could buy. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, could charm or intimidate with a single glance. When he looked at her pregnant form, Isla could never quite decipher the emotion. Was it pride? Or was it the cool assessment of an asset manager evaluating a volatile stock? "Morning," he said, his voice now a warm baritone. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress barely dipping under his weight. He leaned in to kiss her, but his lips were cool, his scent a sterile mix of expensive cologne and ambition. "How are my two most precious investments?" The word hung in the air. Investments. He'd been using it for months, a joke that had long since curdled. In the beginning of their marriage, she was his greatest treasure. Now, she and their unborn son were assets on his personal balance sheet. "We're fine, Adrian," she said, forcing a smile. "Noah was practicing his kickboxing again last night. He's a Carrington, all right, born for the fight." He patted her stomach, a proprietary gesture that made her skin crawl. "Listen, darling, I have to fly to London, a last-minute thing with the Sovereign Wealth Fund. I'll be back Friday." Today was Tuesday. An ache of disappointment, so familiar it was almost comforting, settled in her chest. "Oh, I have the final birthing class on Thursday. I thought you were—" "I know. I'm sorry." His apology was as smooth and empty as a polished stone. "Thompson will drive you, of course. We can't have you taking any risks." He stood up, already mentally in a different time zone. "I've had a chef from Le Bernardin preparing your meals for the week, high in iron and folic acid, and I've instructed the staff that you are not to be disturbed. Rest is paramount." He was building the cage, bar by gilded bar. The driver, the chef, the staff, they were all his employees. Her protectors, yes, but also her wardens. She was a Fabergé egg, too valuable to be handled by anyone, including herself. After he left, the silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Isla walked through the house, a museum of her own life. Her passions had been curated and displayed like Adrian's art collection. The easel and paints in the sunroom, a gift from their first anniversary, were untouched, the tubes of oil paint still sealed. The first edition books of classic literature she loved were locked behind glass. Adrian had said it was to protect them from humidity, but Isla knew it was to keep them from being creased, from being lived in. She ended up in the nursery. It was a masterpiece of neutral tones and handcrafted wooden toys, a mobile of celestial bodies carved from reclaimed oak, hung over a crib that had cost more than her first car. Adrian had overseen every detail, but as Isla ran her hand over the cool, smooth wood of the crib, she felt a profound sense of detachment. This room wasn't for Noah. It was for the idea of Noah. It was another showroom in the Carrington estate. She sank into the plush rocking chair, her body heavy with the weight of her child and her loneliness. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the man she had fallen in love with 4 years ago. The Adrian who had chased her through a sudden downpour in Central Park, laughing and carefree. The Adrian who had listened, truly listened, when she spoke of her dream to open a small community art school. That man was gone, replaced by this polished, controlling stranger. Her phone buzzed, and she looked at the screen. It was a text from her sister, Maya. "How's my favorite whale? Ready for the little guppy to arrive?" A genuine smile finally touched Isla's lips. She typed back, her fingers flying across the screen. "Feeling more like a beached whale. Adrian's off to London again." The reply was instantaneous. "Of course he is. Are you okay, Isa? Really?" How could she explain it? How could she say that she was drowning in luxury, suffocated by care? How could she admit that her greatest fear wasn't childbirth, but the life that would come after? The life of being Mrs. Carrington, mother to the Carrington heir, another perfect object in Adrian's collection. "I'm fine," she typed, "just tired. The baby is keeping me safe." It was the truest thing she had said all day. In this cold, silent house, Noah was her only warmth. He was her anchor, her purpose. He was the one thing that was truly hers, a life growing inside her that Adrian couldn't control, couldn't lock behind glass. And she would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect him. Lydia Marlowe lived in a world of borrowed luxury. The sleek, modern apartment in Stamford wasn't hers. It was leased by Blackwell Industries. The black Mercedes in the garage, the designer clothes in her closet, the very air she breathed. It all came with Adrian Blackwell's invisible insignia. She was a shadow, existing only in the spaces he carved out for her, waiting for the moment she could step into the light. She checked her reflection in the darkened screen of her phone. Her blonde hair was perfect, her makeup immaculate. She had spent 2 hours getting ready for a 10-minute conversation. With Adrian, every second was an audition. The call came precisely at 10:15 a.m., just as he'd promised. He was in the back of his car, the muted sounds of New York traffic a distant hum. "Good morning, Lydia," he said. His voice was different with her. It was the voice he used for deals, crisp, direct, with an undercurrent of command. "Good morning, Adrian," she replied, her own voice a carefully constructed blend of warmth and deference. "I hope your flight was smooth, tolerable. I've wired the funds for your mother's treatment." A wave of relief, so potent it almost made her dizzy, washed over her. "Thank you, Adrian. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I take care of the people who are loyal to me. You know that." There was a pause. "How are things on your end?" Lydia's heart began to beat faster. This was it. This was the real reason for the call. "Quiet. I've been keeping a low profile, just like you asked." "Good, that's good." Another pause. This one longer, heavier. "But the situation is becoming complicated. The pregnancy is progressing. She's getting more emotional, more possessive." Lydia's manicured nails dug into the leather of the armchair. She, the wife, the woman whose name was a ghost in their conversations. Isla. Lydia had studied her photos, memorized her face, the gentle smile, the soft brown eyes. The woman who had everything Lydia had ever wanted, and who held it all so carelessly. "What kind of complicated?" Lydia asked, keeping her voice even. "She's starting to ask questions about my schedule, about expenses. Nothing concrete, but it's a change in pattern. And with the baby coming, a divorce right now would be catastrophic. The optics, the settlement, it would jeopardize the Apollo deal. The Apollo deal. The multi-billion-dollar merger that would make Adrian a king, not just a prince." It was all he talked about. "So what do you want me to do?" Lydia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "She's become a problem, Lydia," Adrian said, his voice dropping to that delicate, dangerous murmur. "A liability. And liabilities need to be managed. They need to be neutralized." The word hung in the air between them, electric and terrifying. Neutralized. It was a word from a spy movie, not a conversation about a pregnant woman. "I need to know you're committed, Lydia. Not just to me, but to the life we've talked about. The life you deserve. This is the final hurdle. Once it's cleared, everything falls into place." Her mind raced. What was he asking? He couldn't be saying. He wouldn't. It was too insane. But she knew Adrian. He never said anything directly. He spoke in a language of suggestion and plausible deniability. He built the car and handed you the keys, but he never told you where to drive. "She walks every afternoon," Adrian continued, his voice smooth as silk, "on the old service road behind the estate, between 2 and 2:30. It's private, secluded. She likes the quiet." He paused. "She thinks it's safe." Lydia's mouth was dry. She could see it. A quiet country road, a lone woman, a car. "Adrian," she started, but her voice failed her. "There's a new rental waiting for you, a dark blue sedan. The keys are in the usual spot. Untraceable. Disposable." He was giving her the tools. He was building the car. "Think about your mother, Lydia. Think about the debts your father left. Think about the life you've been fighting for. Sometimes, to get to the future, you have to be willing to do the hard things, the necessary things." He was tying it all together. Her mother's health, her financial desperation, her ambition. He was weaving a net of obligation and desire around her, and she was the only one who could tighten it. "I understand," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I knew you would," he said, and for the first time, a hint of warmth entered his voice. It was the sound of a master praising his most obedient dog. "I'll be unreachable for the next 48 hours. Total radio silence, for my protection and for yours. We'll speak again on Friday when I'm back." The call ended. Lydia sat in the silent apartment, the phone still pressed to her ear. The borrowed luxury around her suddenly felt like a prison. She looked at her hands. They were trembling. She thought of her mother, frail and fading in a state-run hospital bed. She thought of the eviction notices, the shame, the gnawing hunger of her childhood. Adrian had been her savior, her prince. He had lifted her out of the gutter and shown her the stars. Now, he was asking her to blot one out. A wave of nausea rolled through her. This wasn't love. This was a transaction. She was an employee, and this was the most important, most horrific task she had ever been assigned. But what was the alternative? To go back? To lose everything? To let her mother die? She stood up and walked to the window. Below, the city hummed with life, full of people living normal lives, untroubled by the monstrous choices she faced. She thought of Isla Carrington, walking on a quiet road, her hand on her pregnant belly, a woman who had never known a day of hardship, who had been born into the light. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of her stomach, displacing the fear. Adrian was right. It was a liability, a problem, and Lydia had always been a problem solver. She had fought and clawed her way out of poverty by being ruthless, by being willing to do what others wouldn't. She would not go back to the gutter. She would have the life she was owed. She turned from the window, her expression set. She picked up her purse, her movements now fluid and decisive. She knew where the rental car was. She knew the time. She knew the place. She was no longer a shadow. She was a weapon, and she was about to be aimed. The air on the old service road was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was Isla's sanctuary, a narrow strip of cracked asphalt, winding through a dense wood that bordered the back of the Carrington estate. Here, the silence was different. It was a natural, peaceful quiet, punctuated by the rustle of a squirrel in the undergrowth or the distant call of a blue jay. It was the only place she felt she could breathe. Noah was quiet today, a gentle weight inside her. She strolled at a slow, deliberate pace, her hand resting on the curve of her belly. The trees formed a canopy overhead, dappling the road in shifting patterns of sunlight and shadow. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. The world felt soft, muted, and safe. She thought about Adrian. He would be in a boardroom high above London, commanding, powerful, a world away. She felt a pang of guilt for the relief she felt in his absence. Their life was a beautiful, intricate lie, and she was tired of playing her part. Maybe after Noah was born, she would find the courage to change the script, to demand a real partnership, not this gilded servitude. The thought was a small, fragile spark of hope. She heard the car before she saw it, a low hum, growing steadily louder. It was unusual for this road. It was a dead end, used only by estate maintenance trucks, and never at this time of day. She moved to the grassy edge of the road to give it plenty of room, assuming it was a lost driver. The car, a dark blue sedan with tinted windows, came around the bend. It wasn't slowing down. If anything, it seemed to be accelerating. A flicker of unease sparked in her chest. The road was narrow. The driver was being reckless. She took another step back, her sneakers sinking into the soft mud at the verge. The car kept coming, its engine now a determined growl. It wasn't staying in the middle of the road. It was veering, deliberately, towards her. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing. Isla's mind struggled to process what her eyes were seeing. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a lost driver. The polished hood of the car was aimed at her like a missile. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She tried to run, to scramble further into the woods, but her body felt heavy, clumsy, anchored by the precious life she carried. She managed a single, stumbling step sideways. In that last, horrifying second before impact, The sun glinted off the driver's side window. For a fraction of a moment, the tinted glass became a mirror, and Isla saw a reflection. Not of the driver, but of herself. A distorted image of a terrified, pregnant woman, her mouth open in a scream that made no sound. Then, a different glint. Something inside the car. A flash of blonde hair. A pale, set face. A woman's face. The thought, sharp and clear, pierced through her terror. I know her. And then, the world exploded. The impact was a brutal, physical shock. A monstrous hand that lifted her off her feet and threw her through the air. There was a sickening crunch of metal against flesh and bone. She landed hard on the unforgiving ground, the world tumbling in a dizzying, painful kaleidoscope of green and brown. Pain, white-hot and blinding, erupted in her leg, her side, her head. But it was a distant signal. Her entire consciousness, her entire being, was focused on one thing. Her belly. She landed on her side, and a new, terrible, cramping agony tore through her abdomen. It was a deep, internal shearing, a violation that was worse than any broken bone. Noah. The name was a silent scream in her mind. She tried to curl herself around her stomach, a primal, maternal instinct to shield her child, but her body wouldn't obey. Her vision swam. The blue sedan was already speeding away, its engine a triumphant roar as it disappeared around the bend, leaving only the scent of exhaust and shattered peace. Lying in the dirt and damp leaves, Isla's world narrowed to the searing pain in her womb. A warm, wet sensation was spreading beneath her. She didn't need to look. She knew. She was bleeding. She was losing him. No, she whispered, the word a ragged puff of air. No, please, no. Tears mixed with the dirt on her face. The physical pain was immense, a roaring fire that consumed her. But the emotional agony was a black hole, pulling everything into it. The hope she had felt just moments before, the dream of the man she had married, the future she had envisioned with her son. It was all bleeding out of her, onto the cold, indifferent earth. She thought of the driver. The flash of blonde hair. The pale, determined face. Where did she know her from? A flicker of a memory. A photo on Adrian's tablet he'd clicked away from too quickly. A glimpse of a woman at a restaurant he'd steered her away from. It was a ghost, a shadow she had felt but never seen. Lydia. The name surfaced from the depths of her subconscious, and with the name came a devastating, soul-crushing certainty. Adrian knew. He knew she walked here. He knew the time. Rest is paramount, he had said. We can't have you taking any risks. He had sent her here. He had sent her. The collision wasn't just a car hitting her body. It was the collision of her entire life with a monstrous, unthinkable truth. Her husband, the father of her child, had tried to kill them. The pain in her belly intensified, a vicious, final twist. It was the feeling of something being torn away, the feeling of emptiness. Noah was gone. As her vision began to fade to black, a new feeling rose through the agony and the grief. It was cold, hard, and sharp as a shard of glass. It was rage. They had taken her son. They had taken her future. They had left her to die on a lonely road. But she wasn't dead, and in the ruins of her life, that single fact became a promise, a vow. She would not be silenced. She would not be erased. She would survive, and she would make them pay. The first thing Isla was aware of was the smell. Antiseptic, bleach, and the faint, cloying scent of wilting flowers, the smell of institutional grief. The second was the sound, the rhythmic, electronic beep of a machine that was measuring the beats of her broken heart. She opened her eyes. The ceiling was white, acoustic tiles with faint water stains. She was in a hospital room. A private room, of course. Adrian would have insisted. Memory came rushing back, not as a wave, but as a physical blow. The blue car, the impact, the searing pain. Noah, a sob, raw and guttural, tore from her throat. A nurse she didn't know rushed to her side. Mrs. Carrington, Isla, it's okay, you're safe now. But she wasn't safe. And it wasn't okay. She put a hand on her stomach. It felt empty, deflated. The vibrant life that had been her constant companion was gone. The silence from her own body was more deafening than any noise. "My baby," she rasped, her throat raw. "Is he?" The nurse's face was a mask of professional pity, an expression Isla knew she would come to hate. "I'm so sorry, Isla. The trauma was too severe. We did everything we could, but you lost the baby." The words were clinical, final. They hammered the last nails into the coffin of her hope. She turned her head away, staring at the blank wall, the tears now silent, burning tracks down her temples into her hair. Noah, her son. He never got to take a breath. He never got to feel the sun. He was just a memory, a ghost limb she would feel for the rest of her life. The door opened and Adrian swept in, his face a perfect portrait of anguish. He was dressed in a rumpled suit, his tie loosened, as if he'd rushed straight from the airport. It was a masterful performance. Isla, my God. He came to her bedside, his hands hovering over her, as if he were afraid to touch her. His sea-storm eyes were filled with a convincing replica of tears. "I came as soon as I heard. I took the first flight. A tragic hit-and-run, they said. Some monster." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw him for the first time. The handsome face was a mask. The grief was a costume. Behind the performance, she could feel the cold, calculating mind at work. He was watching her, gauging her reaction, checking to see if the asset had been successfully liquidated. "A hit-and-run," she repeated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The police are investigating," he said, finally taking her hand. His touch was like ice. "They're pulling traffic camera footage, talking to everyone. They'll find who did this. I'll put my own investigators on it too. I'll spend every last penny to bring this animal to justice. I swear to you, Isla." The hypocrisy was so vast, so audacious, it was almost breathtaking. He was the monster. He was the animal. He was promising to hunt himself. She wanted to scream. She wanted to claw at his face, to expose the liar beneath. But a strange, cold calm settled over her. An instinct for survival, honed in the instant before the crash, took over. He thought she was broken, a grieving wife lost in a fog of pain. He thought he had won. Let him. A broken, grieving woman was invisible, and an invisible woman could be dangerous. "The car," she said, her voice a low whisper. It was a blue sedan. Adrian's grip on her hand tightened almost imperceptibly. "Did you see anything else? The license plate? The driver?" She held his gaze, letting him see the emptiness in her eyes. "It happened so fast, I saw a flash of blonde hair, I think. It could have been the sun." She let her voice trail off, as if the effort was too much. She watched him closely. A flicker of relief, so quick she would have missed it if she weren't looking for it, crossed his face. He thought she didn't know. He thought the crucial detail was lost. "Blonde hair," he mused, his brow furrowed in thought. "Okay, that's something. We'll give that to the police." He squeezed her hand. "You just rest now, my love. You've been through a horrific ordeal. I'll handle everything. The police, the hospital, the arrangements. For Noah, he said the name, her son's name, and the sound of it in his mouth was the ultimate desecration. The cold calm within her solidified into something harder, something that felt like purpose. Over the next few days, the room filled with flowers, their sweet scent a sickening mockery of the decay she felt inside. Adrian was a constant, attentive presence, the perfect, grieving husband. He fielded calls, met with doctors, and spoke to the 2 detectives assigned to the case, a weary-looking man named Detective Rowan Hayes and his younger, sharper partner, Detective Ava Lynn. Isla played her part. She was quiet, withdrawn, lost in her grief. She answered the detectives' questions with vague, fragmented memories. She let Adrian speak for her. She watched as he masterfully steered the narrative, painting a picture of a random, senseless tragedy. But in the long, silent hours of the night, when Adrian slept on a cot in the corner of her room, Isla's mind was working. She replayed the collision over and over, not as a victim, but as an analyst. The speed of the car, the angle of its approach, the flash of blonde hair, the name that had surfaced from her subconscious. Lydia, she remembered Adrian's words. It requires a delicate touch. I'll handle it. He hadn't been talking about business. He had been talking about her. The grief was a vast, black ocean inside her, and she was adrift on it. But now, there was a distant shoreline, a point to swim towards. It wasn't justice. The police were looking for a phantom, a random monster. They would never look at the handsome, grieving billionaire whose resources were at their disposal. Justice was a fantasy. What she wanted was colder, cleaner, and far more personal. She wanted to dismantle Adrian Blackwell's world as completely as he had dismantled hers. She wanted to take away everything he valued, his money, his power, his reputation, and leave him with nothing but the truth of what he was. He had made one critical mistake. He had let her live. He thought he had taken everything from her. He was wrong. He had left her with a clarity born of absolute loss. He had left her with a reason to get out of this hospital bed. He had left her with her rage, and she would nurture it, feed it, and forge it into a key. The key to his gilded cage. Returning to the Carrington estate was like returning to the scene of a crime. The opulent rooms, once just symbols of her isolation, now felt sinister, each polished surface reflecting the face of a liar. Adrian had insisted she needed round-the-clock nursing care, another layer of surveillance disguised as concern. Isla had agreed, playing the part of the fragile survivor. Her physical wounds were healing, a fractured tibia, deep bruising that painted her skin in shades of purple and yellow. But her real recovery was happening in secret, in the dead of night. The nurse, a kind, matronly woman named Helen, administered a sleeping pill to Isla every evening at 10. Isla would palm the small white pill, hiding it in her cheek until Helen left, then spit it into the soil of a potted orchid. The first few nights, she lay awake, her body thrumming with a mixture of grief and adrenaline. The emptiness in her womb was a physical ache, a phantom limb she would never stop reaching for. She would allow herself an hour to cry for Noah, to let the waves of loss wash over her. Then she would get to work. Her weapon was Adrian's own arrogance. He believed he was untouchable, his digital life an impenetrable fortress. He had no idea that his wife, the woman he dismissed as a decorative arts major, had a mind as sharp and methodical as his own. In the early days of their marriage, he had proudly shown her his home's integrated security and network systems, a boast about his own genius. He never imagined she was paying attention. Her first target was his office. At 2 in the morning, moving with a pained slowness that belied her determination, she slipped out of her bedroom and down the grand staircase. The house was silent, the staff asleep in their separate wing. Adrian's office was his sanctuary, a mahogany-paneled temple to his own success. It was protected by a keypad, but she knew the code. It was the date of their anniversary, a sentimental choice so unlike him that it could only be a deliberate irony. Inside, she didn't turn on the lights, using only the glow from his massive monitor. She sat in his leather throne, the chair still holding the faint scent of his cologne, and fought back a wave of nausea. She wasn't looking for a smoking gun. Adrian was too smart for that. She was looking for a thread. She started with his financials, accessing the encrypted server with a password she'd seen him type 100 times. Apollo King 7. The vanity of it almost made her laugh. She bypassed the corporate accounts and went for his personal expenditures, the dark corners of his empire. For hours she sifted through shell corporations, offshore accounts, and a dizzying array of credit cards. It was a masterclass in obfuscation. Then she found it. A recurring monthly payment to a high-end leasing agency in Stamford. The payments were funneled through a holding company named LA Holdings. Lydia Adrian. The arrogance again. Attached to the account was a name she didn't recognize. Lydia Marlowe. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Lydia. The name from her subconscious. With trembling fingers, she opened a browser and typed the name into a search engine. The results were sparse, but telling. A LinkedIn profile with a vague title, Consultant at LA Holdings. A few tagged photos on social media from years ago, before she had learned to be a ghost. And there she was, the flash of blonde hair, the pale, determined face, the woman from the car. Isla felt a cold, vindictive satisfaction. She wasn't crazy. She hadn't imagined it. This was her. This was the woman who had held her life and Noah's in her hands and decided they were worthless. The next thread was the car. Adrian had told the police he had his own investigators looking into it. A lie, of course. He was controlling the flow of information. But he had made a mistake. He had used a rental, a disposable asset. Isla found another payment, a one-time charge from a different holding company to a discreet, high-end rental service, also in Stamford. The charge was for a 5-day rental of a dark blue Lexus sedan. The rental period began the day before the collision and ended the day after. It was all there. The woman, the car, the money trail that led directly back to Adrian. It was a neat, tidy package of conspiracy and murder. She could go to the police right now. She could hand detectives Rowan Hayes and Ava Lynn a case tied up with a bow, but she wouldn't. The thought of Adrian and Lydia in a courtroom, surrounded by lawyers who would twist the truth and paint them as victims of a misunderstanding, filled her with disgust. A prison sentence felt too clean, too simple. It was the system's justice, not hers. They had tried to turn her into nothing more than a bloody smear on the asphalt. She would not grant them the dignity of a legal battle. She would give them the same thing they gave her: personal, intimate, soul-crushing ruin. She downloaded everything: the bank statements, the rental agreements, the corporate filings for LA Holdings. She copied them to a small encrypted flash drive she had hidden in a hollowed-out book in her library, a first edition of The Count of Monte Cristo. Her plan began to form, a complex and beautiful architecture of destruction. It wouldn't be a single explosion. It would be a series of controlled demolitions, taking out the support structures of Adrian's life, one by one, until the entire edifice came crashing down. He valued his reputation. She would shatter it. He valued his power. She would strip it from him. He valued his money. She would bleed him dry. When Adrian returned from his next business trip, he found her in the sunroom, dabbing at a canvas with a paintbrush. She had set up the easel he had bought her. "Isla," he said, his voice full of pleased surprise. "It's good to see you painting again. A sign of healing." She looked up at him, her face a carefully constructed mask of fragile recovery. "I thought I should try to find a way forward." She looked down at the canvas. It was an abstract swirl of blues and greys, a storm of color. It was the image of the car, the memory of the impact, translated into something he would never understand. "It's beautiful," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Whatever you need, my love. I'm here for you." She smiled, a small, sad smile that cost her everything. "I know you are, Adrian." He saw a broken wife, slowly piecing her life back together. He had no idea he was looking at the architect of his own demise. The unraveling had begun, and she would not stop until there was nothing left. A month passed. Isla's leg healed, the bruises faded, and she moved through the house with a grace that belied the storm raging within her. She played the part of the grieving widow to perfection. She attended therapy sessions, insisted upon by Adrian, and spoke of her pain in carefully measured tones. She allowed him to comfort her, enduring his touch with a stoicism that he mistook for acceptance. All the while, she was a spider, spinning a web of intricate design, waiting for the right moment to pull it tight. The moment came on a Tuesday, exactly 2 months to the day of the collision. It was the day before the final vote on the Apollo deal, the merger that was to be the crowning achievement of Adrian's career. He was electric with anticipation, pacing the length of his office, his phone buzzing incessantly. Isla chose her moment carefully. She waited until after dinner, after the staff had retired for the evening. She found him in his office, a glass of 30-year-old scotch in his hand, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "To us, Isla," he said, raising his glass as she entered. "Tomorrow, the world changes. Our world. We need to talk, Adrian," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through his euphoria like a shard of ice. He frowned, his good mood evaporating. "Is this about the nursery? I told the decorators to wait until you were ready." "No," she said, walking slowly towards his desk. She wasn't wearing the soft, morning colors he had become accustomed to. She was dressed in a simple, sharp black dress. She looked like a businesswoman, not a victim. "It's about this." She placed a single sheet of paper on his polished mahogany desk. It was a printout of a bank statement. The statement for LA Holdings, showing the monthly lease payments for an apartment in Stamford. Adrian glanced at it, his expression unreadable. "It's a corporate expense. A consultant." "Her name is Lydia Marlowe," Isla said, her voice still unnervingly calm. She placed a second sheet of paper next to the first. It was the rental car agreement for the blue Lexus sedan. "Is she the consultant who drives a Lexus? The kind you rent for 5 days and then dispose of?" A muscle twitched in Adrian's jaw. The mask was beginning to crack. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're not well, Isla. The grief, the trauma, it's making you paranoid." He was falling back on his most reliable weapon, gaslighting. But it wouldn't work anymore. She was immune. "Am I?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. She reached into the portfolio she was carrying and took out a photograph. It was a grainy but clear image from a traffic camera. It showed the blue Lexus turning onto the service road moments before the collision. The angle was just right to capture the driver, a woman with blonde hair. Lydia Marlowe. The police were looking for a monster in a random car. They never thought to subpoena the records for a private car service used by one of your shell companies. But it's amazing what a grieving wife can get when she asks nicely. People are so full of pity. Adrian stared at the photo. The color drained from his face. The predator, for the first time, looked like prey. "This is insane," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "She was a disgruntled employee. She was obsessed with me. I was trying to get rid of her. If she did this, she did it on her own. It was a plausible story, a lie he had probably rehearsed for just this contingency. But Isla wasn't finished. Was she also the one who systematically shorted the stock of Apollo's chief competitor over the last 6 months, using an untraceable offshore account? Isla asked, her eyes locked on his. An account funded by the same holding company that pays her rent? That's insider trading, Adrian. A federal crime. The kind of thing that doesn't just scuttle a merger. It sends people to prison for a very long time. That was the blow that landed. Not the accusation of attempted murder, but the threat to his empire. He sank into his chair, the glass of scotch trembling in his hand. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw genuine fear in his eyes. "What do you want, Isla?" he whispered. "Want?" A dry, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "What do you think I want, Adrian? I want my son. I want the life you stole from me. I want the last 2 months of agony to have never happened. But since I can't have any of that, I'll have to settle." She leaned forward, placing her hands flat on his desk. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer the master of the universe. He was just a man in a cage of his own making. And she was holding the key. "You're going to walk away from the Apollo deal," she said, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "You will cite personal reasons. Then you will sign over 51% of Blackwell Industries to a new trust. A trust I control. You will transfer the titles to this house, the jet, and all liquid assets into my name. You will effectively become my employee. And Lydia Marlowe, you will cut her off. Today, she will get nothing. She will be cast back into the gutter you found her in." He stared at her, his mouth agape. "You're destroying me." "No, Adrian," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm just showing you what you look like on the inside. Empty. Bankrupt. A hollowed-out shell." She stood up straight. "You built this world on the idea that everything and everyone was a commodity to be bought, sold, or disposed of. You tried to dispose of me. You disposed of our son. Well, I'm here to liquidate your assets." He lunged to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You bitch! You think you can blackmail me? I'll destroy you. I'll tell them you're crazy. I'll have you committed." Isla didn't flinch. She simply held up the small, encrypted flash drive. "Everything is on here, Adrian. The financials, the photos, recordings of your calls where you discuss neutralizing your liability. A copy has already been sent to my lawyer, with instructions to release it to the SEC and the district attorney if I don't check in with her every 12 hours. So go ahead. Try to destroy me. You'll only be lighting your own funeral pyre." He stared at the flash drive as if it were a venomous snake. He was trapped. Utterly and completely trapped. The master manipulator had been outmaneuvered. The king had been checkmated. "You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow," Isla said, turning to leave. "The moment the markets open. You'll make the calls, you'll sign the papers, or the world will see you for the monster you are." She walked out of the office, leaving him standing in the ruins of his triumph. She didn't look back. The confrontation wasn't the end. It was simply the beginning of his sentence. His prison wouldn't have bars. It would be the gilded cage he had built for her, where he would live out his days as a powerless ghost in the empire he had lost. The next morning, the world of high finance was rocked by a seismic shock. Adrian Blackwell, the titan, the visionary, the man on the cusp of the biggest merger of the decade, had inexplicably pulled out of the Apollo deal. The official statement was terse, citing grave personal reasons. The stock plummeted. Whispers turned into panicked shouts on trading floors from New York to Hong Kong. Adrian's empire, once thought indestructible, was hemorrhaging value by the second. From the sunroom of the Greenwich estate, Isla watched the fallout on a financial news network, a cup of tea warming her hands. She felt no triumph, no joy, only a cold, quiet sense of order being restored. Adrian was a ghost. He had done as she commanded, his voice a hollow monotone on the phone as he dismantled his own legacy. The lawyers had descended, documents were signed, and control of what was left of Blackwell Industries was transferred to the Noah Carrington Foundation, a trust Isla had established. The name was her own private memorial, a testament to the reason behind it all. Her final act was not for Adrian. It was for Lydia. Isla had tracked her down easily. Without Adrian's funding, Lydia had been evicted from the Stamford apartment within a week. She was now living in a rundown motel off the interstate, the kind of place with peeling paint and the lingering smell of desperation. The black Mercedes had been repossessed. The designer clothes were likely sold. Isla drove herself. She took a simple sedan from the garage, not the Rolls or the Bentley. She found Lydia's room at the back of the motel, facing a dumpster. She knocked on the door. When it opened, Isla was struck by how small Lydia looked, without her armor of wealth. Her blonde hair was limp, her face pale and drawn. The designer dress had been replaced by cheap jeans and a faded t-shirt. When she saw Isla standing there, her eyes widened in pure terror. "What do you want?" Lydia stammered, trying to slam the door, but Isla was quicker, holding it open with a firm hand. "I'm not here to hurt you," Isla said, her voice even. "I'm here to give you a choice." She stepped inside the small, squalid room. It smelled of stale cigarettes and fear. Lydia backed away until she hit the wall, her body trembling. "He's gone, isn't he?" Lydia whispered. "He cut me off. He won't answer my calls." "Adrian is no longer a factor," Isla said. "This is about you and me, about what you did." "He made me do it!" Lydia cried, tears streaming down her face. "He said he'd ruin me. He said my mother. He was paying for her treatment. I had no choice." "There's always a choice," Isla said, her voice hardening. "You chose to get in that car. You chose to press the accelerator. You chose to leave me bleeding on the side of the road. You could have said no. You could have come to me. You could have done 1,000 different things. But you chose to try and murder a pregnant woman for a man who saw you as a disposable tool." The words hit Lydia like physical blows. She slid down the wall, burying her face in her hands, her sobs racking her body. Isla watched her for a long moment, the architect of her own misery. She felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a profound sadness for the waste of it all. This woman had thrown away her soul for a man who had none. "I have a recording," Isla said, her voice pulling Lydia from her despair. "A confession from Adrian. He details everything. Your arrangement, his instructions to you, the plan. He threw you under the bus to save himself, of course. Said you were the mastermind." Lydia looked up, her face a mess of tears and disbelief. "What? He's a coward, Lydia. Did you really expect anything else?" Isla paused, letting the betrayal sink in. "I could give this recording to the police. They would convict you of attempted murder and a dozen other things. You would spend the rest of your life in prison." Lydia's breath hitched. "Please don't." "That is one choice," Isla said, her voice cool and measured. "Or there is another. I have a plane ticket for you. It leaves for Portland, Oregon in 3 hours. There is a cashier's check in the envelope for $10,000. Enough to start over, to get a small apartment, find a job, to build a life, a real one. Not one borrowed from a monster. Lydia stared at her, confused. Why? Why would you do that? Because I don't want your life, Lydia. I don't want you to rot in a cell, thinking about me every day. I don't want to be the ghost that haunts you. That's a prison of its own, and I refuse to be your warden. Your punishment won't be a jail sentence. It will be living with the knowledge of what you did. Every time you see a pregnant woman, every time you hear a child laugh, you will remember my son. You will remember Noah. That will be your life sentence. Isla placed the envelope on the stained motel bedspread. If you are not on that plane, if you are anywhere on the East Coast by midnight tonight, the recording goes to the police. The choice is yours. A cell or a chance. A very small chance that you in no way deserve to become a different person. Isla turned and walked out of the room, leaving Lydia with the two possible futures. She didn't look back. This, she thought, was the real reckoning. Not the destruction of an empire, but the quiet, devastating act of forcing her enemies to live with the truth of themselves. Adrian, a king in a gilded cage he couldn't leave. Lydia, a ghost haunted by a life she had taken. And Isla? She was free. The rage had burned away, leaving behind not emptiness, but a clean, quiet space. A space to build something new, something that mattered. 6 months later, the Carrington estate was sold. The proceeds, along with the bulk of Adrian's liquidated fortune, were funneled directly into the Noah Carrington Foundation. The headlines had faded. Adrian Blackwell was a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms, and Isla had disappeared from the public eye. She hadn't gone far. She bought a modest house in a quiet, leafy suburb an hour away from the city. It had a small garden in the back and a sun-drenched spare room that she had converted into an art studio. For the first time in years, the smell of turpentine and oil paint filled her home. Her life was quiet, but it was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of purpose. Her days were spent not in solitude, but in the bustling, slightly chaotic downtown office she had rented for the foundation. It was a world away from the sterile luxury of Blackwell Industries. The furniture was from IKEA, the coffee was brewed in a cheap drip machine, and the air hummed with the passionate energy of the small team she had hired: social workers, legal aid lawyers, and counselors. The Noah Carrington Foundation didn't just write checks. It provided direct, immediate support for women and children escaping domestic abuse. It secured restraining orders, found safe housing, provided therapy, and helped women get back on their feet with job training and educational grants. It was the safety net Isla never knew she needed, now cast wide for others. She never spoke of the details of her past. To her staff, she was simply Mrs. Carrington, a quiet, fiercely dedicated philanthropist with a sad story she didn't share. But they saw her strength. They saw the way she listened to survivors' stories, her eyes filled with an empathy that went beyond mere pity. She wasn't just funding the work, she was living it. One afternoon, a young woman named Maria sat in her office, a baby sleeping in a carrier at her feet. Maria had come to them 2 months ago with a broken arm and a black eye, fleeing a husband who saw her and her child as his property. The foundation had gotten her into a new apartment, found her a job, and was providing daycare. I wanted to thank you, Mrs. Carrington, Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. You didn't just give me money. You gave me my life back. You gave my son a future. Isla looked from Maria's grateful face to the sleeping baby, his tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. For a moment, the old ache, the ghost of Noah, clenched her heart. It never truly went away, but it was no longer a raw, open wound. It was a part of her, a scar that reminded her not just of what she had lost, but of why she was here. "You did the hard work, Maria," Isla said, her voice soft. "You were brave enough to leave. We just opened the door." After Maria left, Isla walked to the window of her office. It overlooked a small city park. Children were laughing on the swings, their parents watching from nearby benches. It was a simple, ordinary scene, the kind of life she had once taken for granted and then had stolen from her. She had never heard from Lydia again. A part of her hoped she had gotten on that plane, that she was trying, somewhere in the vastness of America, to be better. She had never seen Adrian. Her lawyers informed her that he still lived in a small, private hotel in the city, a prisoner of the terms she had set. He had his money, but no power, no influence. He was a nobody. She rarely thought of him. He had become irrelevant. Her redemption hadn't come from revenge. The destruction of Adrian's world hadn't healed her. It had only cleared the rubble. Her healing, her new dawn, was here. In the quiet moments of her new life, in the brush strokes on her canvas, in the grateful eyes of a woman she had helped save. She had taken the ugliest, most painful moment of her life and transformed it into a force for good. She had refused to let their evil define her. She had built a legacy for her son, not out of marble and gold, but out of hope and survival. A small smile touched Isla's lips. The grief was still there, a quiet companion. But it was no longer her whole story. She was more than just a victim. She was more than a survivor. She was the architect of her own peace. And in the quiet hum of her new life, she had finally, truly, found her way home. Isla's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can forge the strongest wills. She turned her pain into a shield for others and rewrote her ending, not with vengeance, but with purpose. Her journey from a gilded cage to a life of meaning shows that true power isn't about wealth or status. It's about the courage to rebuild from the ashes and to use your voice for those who have been silenced. If this story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates tales of resilience and justice. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more dramatic stories that explore the complexities of the human heart. What did you think of Isla's final choice? Let us know in the comments below. Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to light. Thank you for watching.